Hey, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about why now is the best time in history to be a creative person. And to do that, I'm going to unpack a story about trust and how trust is moved from institutions to individuals and how creators or creative people are underpinning the modern trust economy that everything revolves around. So to outline the story, we're going to dive into a bit of history where we're going as far back as the Renaissance up to the printing press, the Industrial Revolution, and then the invention of the internet. I'll be talking about the gatekeepers all along the way that have been between the creative person and the audience of that creative person. Then I'll dive into this idea of trust as the new currency of the economy and how trust has moved from institutions to big brands down to individuals. Next, we'll assume that we've bought into this new currency of trust and we've built trust with an audience. What are the business models available to creative people today that were just never an option before? And lastly, I'll create the argument for why I think creative people are the best positioned to really take advantage of this new trust economy and to leverage these unique skill sets that very few other people can. So hello, I'm Warwick, and on this channel, What It Is to Create, I explore the business of creativity. What I'm trying to understand is how have some people seemed to take a path less traveled and followed a career of passion and creative expression in a way that they've been able to create a business or some sustainable livelihood out of it. And to do that, I'm peeling back the layers to go behind the scenes to understand the practicalities of what it takes to unlock a life of creative freedom. So let's dive into this topic. Okay, so it's in the 17th, 16th century, and it's the Renaissance. Now we know the Renaissance produced some amazing masters, such as Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. But in order to live this creative life, these masters had to pitch themselves to the institutions that held the power and the wealth at the time. So imagine pitching yourself to the Catholic Church to paint the ceiling. Another popular thing at the time was patronage, which is how Da Vinci made his livelihood, which was through the Medici family. But this operating environment was pretty limiting for artists. Only a few artists could really make it because only a few artists were really supported by the few mega institutions that existed. Okay, so fast forward in time and we've got the invention of the printing press, which really proliferates information and education and leads to a growing middle class. Now this middle class, naturally as an aspiring upper class, begins to appreciate art as something they can buy. And this leads to the invention of art galleries, where artists can put their art in galleries and the middle class can come and look at them and potentially buy them, which is great. But the galleries are still the gatekeepers between the artist and the audience. Jump ahead a little bit more into the future, and we've got media becoming more mainstream. And creative people are finding a home sort of nested inside of other industries. Growing media is a great example of this. If we look at newspapers, you need copywriters, designers, layout people, maybe even cartoonists. Creative people are really finding space within industries. And this is really the birth of capitalism as we know it today, where you become hyper-specialized in something and contribute that skill to sort of a bigger machine, and that trudges along. Now the issue there is that your institution becomes your gatekeeper to the creative things. You need to become skilled at something very specific to get a job at something very specific to participate in this creative economy with these institutions. Then what happens is the invention of the internet. Now the internet really distributes that power dynamic. It's not about these big institutions who have all the sort of resources and control, such as your media houses or your publishers or your record labels. So suddenly anyone can create a service that mimics what these sort of institutional things were doing. And this is an important shift because opportunities for your creatives becomes much more expansive because the audience becomes much more accessible, where I can now sell my artwork directly to a customer, and the only person I need to convince in this case is the customer. There's no intermediary. So today there's been a complete shift in power of the institutions to the individuals. And this has come around because of big tech and the attention economy. What's happened is media companies before would have to push articles and news and information to keep people invested in what they have to then sell advertising space. Whereas the new model says that individuals are the content creations to hold that attention, which then sells the advertising space. And for better or for worse, what's happened here is that the individuals who are underpinning this economy have a lot of the power because they actually hold the conditions of the audience. So you've got brands who are coming via tech companies to get access to that audience that the creators hold. But the important bit of the story is that it's flipped this dynamic of who owns an audience from the institution to the individual. And this shift in power really comes down to a notion of trust. Previously, we would have trusted an institution to give us what we would assume is best in class. We would follow the newspaper to get trustworthy news. We would rely on the universities to give us the best possible education. We would rely on entertainment companies to give us the best possible entertainment. But with the new attention economy, that trust has flipped, where now it's much easier to trust in an individual than it is a brand. We could quickly look at the tech review space as an example of this, where you've got Wired magazine, which was founded in like 1992 or something. And then you've got MKBHD, a YouTuber who specializes in tech reviews, arguably with a bigger current day market share than the magazine. And this isn't really surprising because it's easier to trust in an individual, someone that you can watch, you can relate to, you get invested in that character. Whereas where that's an institution, you're relying on a lot of trust on a brand. Like the authors of the content will change, they'll get different copywriters, whatever it might be. So it kind of makes sense why trusting a big institution is a little bit more difficult than trusting the guy on YouTube. And we've actually all seen this play out in our personal lives. Here, I've got this book. It's a cookbook called Happy Skin Kitchen by Elisa Rosie that my wife bought. And my wife started following Elisa on Instagram, but got invested in the personality of Elisa. And then when she eventually wrote a cookbook, bought that cookbook. Now, if she wasn't invested in that character, if she hadn't built a personal rapport and some kind of trust in this digital creator, there's probably very little chance that this would have been advertised to her, hey, buy my cookbook, and she would have actually gone ahead and done it. But it's not only on the individual levels. This is why the attention economy works for big brands too. Because those institutions have lost the trust of those audiences, they now come to the individual creators to access that trust. So if building trust in an audience is like the single most important currency within this new economy, how do you as an individual creative take advantage of an audience once built? So let's assume you have built an audience. There are multiple income opportunities to you available. Firstly, we've got the traditional like sell your things. Let's say you are an artist and you have made paintings. You can access your audience and sell your painting to the audience in the same way that Happy Skin Kitchen now sits on my kitchen countertop. The next opportunity is to sell your ideas. Like the artist doesn't need to sell paintings anymore, and the carpenter doesn't need to sell tables, and the musician doesn't need to sell her music, but they can sell ideas around their crafts, such as their knowledge or their processes or their systems. The next, and we've already sort of touched on this, is selling the audience. Because you as the creator now have access to that trusted audience, other people are willing to pay you to get access to that audience. Now, typically the way that creative economy is going to work is that if you're pumping out content around art and you build a following of people interested in art, it's most likely that someone who wants to get access to that audience of art would be selling something around art. The next thing to sell would be your brand. And this is a flip from selling your audience, where selling your brand implies that other brands would like to associate with you because that's better for their brand. Maybe Red Bull is a good example of this, where the action-oriented brand really relies on individuals who live this like super adventurous, active life on the edge sort of life. And the takeaway here is you can't just do your creative endeavor in isolation. Like you can't just go and write your book and create your music or build that script and then step into the world of marketing it. Because once that creative thing exists, to give it life in the world, you're going to have to find a gatekeeper who has access to that audience. Now, there's inefficient ways to do that. You can pay for marketing, advertising, which is essentially just buying that space, or for a creator who's already built that audience. Or you could go through the traditional institutions and try to get a book deal or a record label, but honestly, that model is probably outdated considering all the information we started with here. To really succeed at this creative thing is to acknowledge that part of what you're doing has to be building an audience. And building an audience like really just means building trust and rapport with people beyond your immediate scope of reach. And I argue that creative people are particularly well suited to do this trust building and audience building thing. The first reason is because of the medium that the audience has found. Obviously, within the attention economy, we've got trust being built around audiovisual mediums. So being good at writing, being good at storytelling, being able to communicate those ideas visually, being able to sell that story, being able to communicate well, these are all things that would typically sit within the bucket of a creative skill set. The other aspect and link to the previous is that it's not such a far reach from your core craft to the secondary craft of audience building, because often your core craft will have some of these ingredients baked into them anyway. So that jump from making the painting to making the thumbnail is not a very big one. And the last superpower that I think creatives have is this ability to be generalists. The previous models of institutional creativity required you to become an absolute specialist, do something very specific in your job within the bigger machine, and that's what you stuck to. Now in the world of content creation, you're managing marketing, you're managing sales, you're managing brand, you're managing art direction, and a hyper-specialized skill set wouldn't actually get you very far. If you are a creative person, building an audience is the key thing you can do in parallel to your creative act. Because once that creative act needs to get some wind into its sails to be set free into the world, you're going to need a bunch of strangers who have built some kind of rapport and trust you in some kind of way to make it feasible to sell your own thing. But along the way, you can take that same audience and do many different things with it in a business sense. So that's it. I think being creative in 2025 is really a superpower. So go out and create and build trust with an audience. Cheers.